Welcome to the Moline Public Library. It is my pleasure to have you here during National Poetry Month. And to start, I wanted to share with you, last week NPR and WBIK brought in a woman named Krista Tippett, who talks a lot about On Being. And she interviewed a poet named Marie Howe. And Marie Howe has this to tell us about poetry. And she says, well, poetry holds what can't be said. It can't be paraphrased, it can't be translated, and the great poetry I love holds the mystery of being alive. And when I heard Dale Haake speak at Kiwanis, one of my Kiwanis buddies is one of his law partners. This is not your typical lunchtime program, and I thought the librarian needed to be in the room that day. And what I heard was the
talking
mystery.
About lanes and mortgages?
And what I heard was that mystery of life and Dale's story and how it comes out in poetry. So many of you seem to be good friends, and I may be telling you things you already know. I've learned a few things about Dale this week I didn't know, which were delightful. He graduated from Augustana College cum laude in '74 with a BA in French. He has a degree from the Sorbonne in Paris, 1973, this says. Graduated from the University of Illinois, Go Illini School of Law, 1979. And worked in the legal service of the Commission of the European Community in Brussels. He practices in the area of complex bankruptcy, hence the reference, commercial litigation, and family unity immigration. He met his wife Conchita in Brussels, where she was an interpreter for the Spanish government. She is a professor and author in her own right. And they have 3 children, Alexandra and Elena, who reside in Chicago, and Pablo, for whom they are still paying the college fees. Dale was the Quad Cities Regional Poet Laureate from 2008 to 2010. And I know he's most recently read over at Moline High School again. He's read in many schools for radio and live performances. He is a published poet and the winner of several poetry prizes. So let him speak in the words and the mystery of being alive.
Thank you, Lisa, and the Moline Public Library for a generous and ego-fulfilling invitation. Now lock the doors. I do look around this beautiful building and I nod to one of my partners, one of the greatest law partners a guy could have, Carl Huntoon, whose work on this Moline Public Library was instrumental in getting it built. You never know what you're supposed to read when you come to an event like this. Should I be reading for me? Should I be reading for you? Sometimes I don't know who you are. I know a lot of the faces in this room. When I was at Moline Public High School recently, I knew that every one of the students would be fresh meat, so to speak. I wouldn't have to apologize to someone for having listened to my poetry on many occasions, like Dick Stahl, Roll Tweet, Gladys and Diego, Bill, Judge Cleve, Judge Kilbride. So I want you to know that I put together a program partially for you and partially for me. And I throw a lot of foreign words in my poetry. So I try and give you a little bit of warning about that and what they are. And as I began to rewrite in the early 2000s, I had written quite a bit before and then stopped for a number of years and started rewriting again, and even back to high school, people would say, your poetry is so depressing. You know, it's just awful. I mean, God, I just want to... So I'm inspired by the downright awful, the hopeless, the demons, and the downright depressing. So I've heard from family and friends, can't you write anything that's, you know, just a teensy bit upbeat? Like, dude. So I was forced by that to write some poetry, and especially once I started having kids, it was a lot easier. I've divided today's reading into various categories. When I read for schools, I used to always have a little packet, and they'd be divided into family and Davenport, and then Spain, and then fate, and then politics, terrorism, and war. And I'd give the kids a choice, and every time we want to hear about politics, war, or terrorism. So I'd read them poems about that. So I've divided this up into various things, including some comic relief. But what could be more distressing and depressing than World War II? So let's start out with a World War II poem, an anti-war poem. So of course it's called The Flowers. But it's the Nazis, man, the Nazis. So of course it's not the flowers, it's die Blumen. There are a couple of German words. Mann means man or husband. Kirsch is the only cherry liqueur that's not sweet. Kursk, largest battle in history. Soviet tanks defeated the German tanks. Leutnant, lieutenant. Blankenese, rich Hamburg suburb. And Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. Die Blumen. And the old German woman with the black apron and wide feet, widowed in 39. Her man, never tasting the sweetness of victory over France, nor the bittersweet Kirsch of Kursk. Tending die Blumen, ever die Blumen, geraniums and roses, scarlet in defiance of the gray Hamburg skies. Blankly passing der Leutnant's fading photo on her Blankenese mantle, avoiding the thorns, torn lives, two sides of the veil, only partly hiding the what was from the what could have been. Azure eyes, now buried among the wrinkles. Buried memories of youth gone awry, of youth left to rot in shallow graves. Her neighbor's shop smashed in Kristallnacht. She looked away. Her long interred shame, fleeting across her consciousness, barely. A thorn digs its neutral point into her aged thumb, and the drops of blood spatter die Blumen, mix with the crimson petals, disappearing beneath the gunmetal Hamburg skies. Well, another one on World War II. We'll have some comic relief in a minute. Nazis, always the Nazis. I always wonder how a civilization that was incredibly great with some of the greatest philosophers and chemists and engineers and writers and poets could somehow just go into the depths. So I'm always thinking about the Nazis. Then I'm listening to NPR on my way to the doctor, and they talk about the reptilian brain. I'm sitting in the doctor's office. I see a young mother with probably a 2-month-old baby looking down at the little baby. So I thought about those three things, and out came the poem, Mama Hitler Looks Down. Mama Hitler looks down, reflects on the furry down on that fragile little head, deceives us clowns and our daily bread. For beneath the closing sutures lurks the false security of the skull, masks the reptilian brain, waiting to pounce, flirting with genius or the drain pipe of bad ideas, of fledgling art, or dredging up the train wrecks of lost souls, of Jews and Slavs and Poles and the wages of false gold, false gods, false hopes, marching along through time immemorial to the ferocious downing of all that is new and young. Little Adolf, the graveyard of the good. Okay, how you doing? So comic relief, Roman numeral 1. I was on the plane coming back from Madrid, and I was sitting down, and there was a young lady next to me. We struck up a conversation, and she was flying from Madrid to go to the West Coast to study contemporary American poetry. Holy cow. We spent half the plane ride talking in Spanish, half the plane ride speaking in English, I think, when we got past Iceland. And, you know, you wonder when you use phrases, does the person understand, you know, an idiom or something? And I use the term when the dust settles. So later on, this poem came out. It's the only poem I've ever written where the title's at the end. When the dust settles. Which of course makes no sense at all because the dust will never settle. It's not in the nature of dust to settle, but to scurry about, zinging this way and that, filling waterfalls of light, screaming mightily at the top of their, well, dear listeners, you do need a little imagination here, lungs, mite-sized but no doubt lustily singing little operettas to the grand applause of the assembled but not quite settled multitudes. That's a Sunday afternoon everywhere. Okay, I got a call one day from Tweet. He goes, Haake. He never calls me Dale. I never call him Roll. Haake. Got to enter the Clarihue contest. Okay, what's a Clarihue? What do you mean? A Clarihue is a whimsical four-line biographical poem invented by Edmund Clarihue Bentley. The first line is the name of the poem's subject, usually a famous person, eventually put in an absurd light, or revealing something unknown or spurious about them. The rhyme scheme is A, A, B, B. The rhymes are often forced, and it doesn't say here, but a little vulgarity is helpful. So how about this one? John Wilkes Booth found courage in a little vermouth. He fell on his leg, not his anus, while yelling Sic Semper Tyrannis. Or George Armstrong Custer, all yellow curls and bluster, all shorn, that little bighorn. All right, that's enough fun. In the early 1980s, a young farmer came to me, young wife, either 3, 4, or 5 kids, can't remember. And I thought, okay, farmer in the farm crisis. No, he was dying of a rare heart disease. He's going to be dead in 2 years. And so I worked hard to try and get the creditor's office back. Wouldn't work, very aggressive creditors, wound up filing a bankruptcy. It was really difficult. And these were farmers. They would drive an hour and a half to my office in Rock Island, and it took me 8 minutes, and they'd beat me there in the morning. Farmers. Well, when the dust was over, the only thing that was left was the auction of the farm equipment. And so, of course, this was a really sad, sad day. And it was 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and 6:45, I make it to their auction. And they look at me like, what are you doing here? It's like, you know, don't you get here at 10? And I said, moral support. So, by the way, the townspeople bought the farmhouse and 5 acres so that he could spend the rest of his days, not many, and the family could live there. So this is the auction. And not this time, but a couple of times ago, at Moline High School, I asked like 18 kids what the last line meant. 12 of them raised their hand. They knew. Okay, so there'll be a test later. The auction. Muddy and rutted the field, once golden straw sticks to tires of tractors and harrows like creditors' liens. Springtime and hope lies like last fall's leaves under gray snow, in early morning shadows like out-of-county bidders. The bank wants to sail in the spring. It's in your best interest, they say, looking out for their best interest. Bib overalls cover weathered skin, osh gosh by gosh, but oh God, says the missus, looking out past her spotless white curtains as her husband stands framed by the rose trellis among bright green implements, a jagged strip of hay protruding from his lip, a gnawed weather vane, as friends and neighbors come to pay their respects like a wake, nodding in their decalb seed hats. Pickup trucks line the highway east and west. Mechanical pallbearers as onlookers pace on. The auctioneers babble, a diapason of material worth meted out like lashes. And then the sun sneaks between the barn and the corn crib, rays splattered by dew and spider webs splayed out from behind his straw hat. She sees him crucified upon a cross of gold. Okay, the next one, it's called Timetable, T-H-Y-M-E, table. And sorry for the trite exploration of a serious subject. This poem is about schizophrenia, so here goes. Since it's a poem about schizophrenia, it's divided into two parts. And the first part is a mixture of a salad of food and railroads and lack of reason and all this kind of stuff. And then it's divided in two by a Latin phrase, ipse dixit. I put Justice Kilbride on the spot one time. I said, oh, Justice Kilbride knows what that is. But it's a Latin phrase that means because he said it. And it's a defense. It's a response to someone who has no facts, no law, no reason, and they want you to believe it because he said it. Ipse dixit. Okay. So, and Saison en Enfer is Rimbaud's most famous work, Season in Hell. Timetable. I really didn't have the slightest notion. Or was it nation? Yes, I'm Poland and I lost a whole nation. Or was it me starving when I lost my ration or ration? Obviously without reason or raison d'etre. This saison en enfer, this hilarious devotion, this division, this quotient of pure 100% organic locomotion has left the station. Ipse dixit. And I stare into the splintered sunset at the glinting tracks, parallel for a while, like my schizophrenic shadow, until the whistle of the next train tells me it's time to go home. Okay. Next section is called A Poetry of Inspiration. And I can't read this poem without crying. And there's two poems in Poetry of Inspiration. And I wrote this poem, I'd say in 2009, when a great guy, John Kylie, passed away unexpectedly. He was a terrific community leader. Among other things, throughout his career, he was head of the United Way, a man whose philanthropy and desire for social justice touched thousands of people. And at 54, he left a widow and two daughters, one, Julia, still in high school. She was and is a fantastic oboe player, and at his service, she played a soaring and haunting piece. So I wrote this for the three Kylie ladies. And I cheated. I included a whole Shakespearean sonnet in the poem. I won't read that to you tonight. Suffer by comparison. But I asked Katie, since it was a gift to her and her daughters, if she wouldn't mind if I read it. And she said she would be honored. So if I cry and slobber, someone bring the tissues. Okay, so this is for John. And it was really for Julia because she was the youngest. Words, indeed, are slender reeds to try and hold our deepest thoughts, fragile and easily swayed by the slightest breeze. But there are times when it is all we have, all we can offer from our hearts, our souls, And so we humbly offer this to all three of the Kylie ladies, but especially to say how lucky you are, Julia, to have had as a model, a pillar, an example, a man like your dad, whose very life spoke, no, sang of justice and peace, and who built a foundation for you forever. For solace, he might say the Psalms, or perhaps a Shakespearean sonnet. He would read to you like this, and I put in the sonnet, or like Lincoln consoling a young lass whose father died all too young at 31, a captain at Antietam, and recalling his own early sorrows of a lost mother, an only sister, an infant, and a teenage son. Quote, "In this sad world of ours, sorrow comes to all, and to the young comes with bitterest agony, because it takes them unawares. And so it is, the fragile reed of words. Yet that same reed vibrates in your skilled hands, in your determined embouchure, as lilting notes of the oboe wafting through your house, and then through God's cathedral, and the tear-filled eyes of friends and loved ones. A strong reed supporting the weight of all that love, pulsing with sublime sounds to surround us with the divine, the echoes of those sounds, like the echoes of your Father's goodness and the thousands that he touched, will never go away. And so he will always be with you, even until your dying day. This reed, deceivingly slender, a powerful symbol for your firm foundation, he at the base, you the tender shoot, reverberating, alive, the music that will never be silenced, and whose presence ensures that you too, one day, will be able to smile unreservedly with all of your heart." Okay, another one that I can hardly get through, and by the way, Julia, our oldest daughter Alexandra, babysat for Julia, and what good things go around come around. By the time our son Pablo was born, 10 years later, Julia was his babysitter. Okay. Through my entire conscious life, I've looked up to my brother Roy. Not only were we dear friends, we were fierce competitors with each other in everything we did, but he protected me. He protected me from my big mouth on the playground. I got into all kinds of fights with bigger guys because I would insult them, I'd be sarcastic, I would shoot them down, and he would come and protect me. And his pretty face, not a mark. He'd sit in the bathtub after protecting me from 3 guys, black and blue, everywhere else but his pretty face. Well, he continues to offer me advice and consent to this very day, but he suffers very, very badly from MS, and he's in a wheelchair. He loves his espresso, and I was there a few years ago, and he was losing the ability to move, and he, with a determined hand, grabbed that cup of double espresso, that Fiesta ware, and he got it up, and he took a drink, and he looked at me. And so I wrote this poem for him called Victory Dance. Quote, "He puts his legs on one leg at a time, just like you." Unquote. Oh, no, he doesn't. Because the MS took his legs away years ago and made them into sprattled appendages mottled in color and spotted with worthless veins and bumps. The espresso cup does a slalom course between the edge of the table and his eager mouth, waiting impatiently like a baby bird for the liquid excitement, quivering finger fighting to meet determined thumb, a triumph of will, as he slurps the Arabica in satisfaction. This big brother who fought all my playground battles to put bullies in their place, with implacable resolve in the face of their bigger bodies and strutting threats. He smiles at me through his crema mustache, his baby blues dancing with each little victory. I move on to a section I call a poetry of longing, and I don't know what year it was, must have been in 2003 or something. They announced the Bettendorf Library is going to have a poetry contest, okay? And the winner is going to have his or her name carved in stone. Oh, I thought, well, this shouldn't be that difficult. I already saw my name, you know, I put the G in there, you know, what script, you know. Okay, well, I went to the Bettendorf Library one night, and I walked up to a lady that looked like she would just as soon eat my first child. Very nice lady, actually, very nice lady. And I said, I have a question about the poetry contest. She says, "What's your question, sir? It's all done." I said, "Oh, I know, but I was just wondering." And before I got that out, she said, "If you'd have won anything, they'd have notified you." I said, "Okay." In the meantime, I had worked really hard on this poem. I had books all over the dining room table for a month. I studied Emily Dickinson. I studied books about her. I found out who the judge was. I read stuff the judge had written. Oh, boy, I was ready. And I worked really hard. And I had a pile of failures. And then I had this poem. I thought, okay, this is the winner. You know, just, when's the New York Times going to call? Okay. Didn't win anything. A really, really excellent poet won, and her name is carved in a stone there, and she deserved it. But this one, the only rules were Emily Dickinson contest, and you had to include a flower that she had used. So this is a short poem for a long introduction, but it's about the potentially lonesome wife of a farm wife, and it's called The Crocus. A chimney breathes its hazy prayer, skyward in the winter's gloom. Stolid bricks the farm wife's lair, chilly fingers pluck the loom. Fence logs hug still buried meadows, spring just a hope some months away. A crocus dares the silent snows, her husband enters, not much to say. Okay, Poetry of Inspiration 2. Wasn't sure if I would get to this one. I kept moving things around. Our son Pablo, he's done very well for himself, and very few times, like his older sisters would come to me and ask me questions about school and this or that. He was kind of on autopilot. Did a very good job. I don't think hardly at all he ever asked me or his mother for any help with anything in high school, hardly at all. He told me one day, a lady's coming from Des Moines. They're going to interview me for this State of Iowa Youth Advisory Council, but I won't get it. Well, not only did he get the position, the next year the 24 kids around the state elected him as the chair. Well, the next time that I heard any indecision, or I wouldn't say indecision, he's very indecisive, but any lack of confidence, was when he accepted the admission to Stanford. And he said to me, I don't know if I don't know. And I said, you don't know what? He goes, I don't know if I'm, I said, just be yourself. Just be yourself. That's all you need is yourself. But you need all of you. Okay, fast forward. We're there, we're going around the campus, it's orientation, and it's great and everything. And finally, there's a last show and stuff in the lounge for the kids, and it's all glass, and it was fun, and this and that, and it was great. And then they gave us a 15-minute warning, kind of like the 2 warning in football. Parents, 15 minutes, then you're out. They gave us a 5-minute warning. In the meantime, they gave us these magic markers and said, see these glass walls? See these windows? Write whatever you want for your kid. We promise. We'll keep it there the whole year. Okay? So Conchita wrote something in Spanish, and I wrote a variation of, making sure you... So this is a glamorized variation of all of you. Just be yourself. It is enough, so long as it is all of you. Push the envelope, but do not tear it, unless you are sure it is worth it. Stretch the fabric of that marvelous mind, and mind you mend whatever fences need mending, remembering, always remembering that we are one, as woven by John Donne. Dream of your journey, but insist on sitting at the front of the bus. Grounded in that quest, true to yourself, at your best, it is enough. Don't put on airs, but pull on all the oars. You chose Stanford because you saw all willing to be pulling with you. And the ship slides from its slip with all on board. Another one, I guess I threw a bunch of poetry of inspiration. Well, let's go back to a poetry of distress, shall we? This is just too much otherwise fun and inspiration. This one doesn't need much introduction at all. They had the immigration raid, 10 years ago or something at Postville. And it's called, and the only word you might not know is ICE. Now we know it. Everyone knows it now, but it's Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Immigration raid at Postville. For whom the bells toll. For those who toil in anonymity, so our steaks can grill just so. Bells and sirens cold as ice chill the air. Days of uncertain future, of certain killing of bovines in gruesome and chilling death lines. The clank of handcuffs, the clank of that Weber toted from the pristine garage. The yank of carcasses in obscene array. Ribeye, New York strip, and filet mignon. The Matamoros shuffle, not even allowed a duffel, move on. Kids without daddies, I'll take mine medium rare. But where do you draw the line between legal and illegal, humane or not? Processing meat, now alive, now dead. They are like processed meat, without due process. It tolls for thee. How's it going? All right. Here's one. It's too much fun there. All right. Let's go to, this is one. Do you guys know what that is? In the mid-1800s, Giuseppe Fiorelli succeeded in making plaster casts of the empty spaces crews were finding in the ash and lava at Pompeii. They emerged, whitened in solid but ghoulish forms of humans and their pets. So I saw that in '73 when I was a student. And I think I saw it again. And in March of 2006, they had a Pompeii exhibit at the Field Museum. And we went. And I saw a bunch of these figures. I started thinking about those people. And I wrote Confrontation with a Voyeur at the Field Museum. Am I a voyeur in my Robert Stock silk jacket, my Levi Strauss 501s, with my Levi Strauss mentality, my Derrida daring to be Dada? A voyeur at the gates of Pompeii? Did this Roman citizen, contorted in anguish, consent to have her crumbled nothingness molded in plaster of Paris to memorialize her last fateful position? A voyeur peeping at the shape long ago eaten, decomposed to space, to air, to absolutely nothingness for 1,800 years, to be resurrected by ingenious methods and identified by the bracelets she did wear. 1,800 years of air to be conjured by an archaeologist, to be reconstructed on the outside, expression permanently impressed upon the igneous, oh, the ignominious interruption of her eternal peace, to have vanished from this world and now to live again in the eyes of total strangers 2,000 years younger. In her total silence, she screams, "I did not ask for this." Doing okay on time?
We're doing great.
Okay. I never get to read this poem, and it was kind of on my list, and then I got taken off the list because I didn't think I'd have time. And Lisa was very kind to blow up something, and basically all you can see is kind of dark figures, but they're dragging in, they're from the Irish Sea, the fishermen are dragging in a currach, a very dangerous boat that they went out in and they sometimes drowned in. And when I was at Augustana, we read a play by Jonathan Millington Synge called Riders to the Sea. One-act play, I think. Very Catholic play, Holy Trinity throughout. There's a widow with her son. She's a widow because her husband didn't come back from a currach. And I believe in the play they bring the sweater of her oldest boy. And I'm not sure they ever find the body, but... Okay, so this is an actual true story, exactly as it happened to me, give or take. And a couple words, Paul Verlaine, a famous French poet, and one of his poems I really love has a phrase, si bleu, si calme, so blue, so calm. So I've got Riders to the Sea, I've got some French words, and that's about it. So this is called The Warning of the Currach Maker. From the distant highland, the sea was Verlainesque, si bleu, si calme, a fragrance of heather dancing along the macadam, following the jagged coastal road, lazy whitecaps, cream on that azure placidity, a few specks of black the only imperfections. The reverie broken by bright red taillights and screech of brakes to my outstretched thumb. The Dubliners, so breezily cosmopolitan, in this quilt land of sheep herders and squinting seamen, barely squeezing into their Austin of bleached tan leather. We're looking for a currach maker. The currach maker, she corrected. There is only one left, you know. I didn't know, and I didn't know if a currach was what I thought it was, remembering my Riders to the Sea. They told us he'd be here in Ballybunion, or maybe we'd find him in Ballinskellig's Bay, but he doesn't want to build them anymore. Too bloody dangerous, he told us through a friend in Kilkee, and she laughed with a flick of her neck, her scarf dancing in the breeze, a wind-whipped pennant on the Carpathia. A city dweller with no fear beyond the pale, a landlubber's blissful hurrah. Descending, the hills hugged the weather-beaten town, and the bay punched its way right to the belly of the town's main pub. Cobblestones glistened with seawater, dribbled from black-bottomed currachs, drugged from the water by woolen-capped men straight from Sing. Can you tell us where to find Mr. Hugh O'Donnell? Addressing a distressed-looking fellow, gazing intently out to sea. Eyeing her suspiciously, he jerked a thumb towards the bar. In the east, not a cloud to be seen, but the western sky, rapidly grew to an inky pitch. Gulls dipped and veered, barking their warnings, bobbing like the few tethered skiffs as the swells increased. The churning sea began to rise, tufted white currach breakers, riders to the sea. All eyes on a vessel a half mile from the coast. So long as Billy's got his oars, it'll be okay. The voice quavering, Billy thrashing in the buttes of foam. No one moved as the wind gusted and the distant figure splayed at the gunwales until one gigantic wave plastered him and an oar soared heavenward, crashing some 50 feet from the currach, which began to twirl in the eddies, tunneling swells now buffeting the spinning coracle. 3 men came running from the pub. The old one stopped near us, eyes transfixed on the figure battling the billows, as his 2 sons dragged a second currach to fight the boiling surf, now crashing to the edge of the stony breakwater. "Don't go, Patty!" A woman's voice screamed from the balcony of a house, partially drowned by the crashing surf and the screeching gulls. The old man biting his pipe, his eyes squinting at the 3, racing before the squall felled his eldest. The farther boat now out of control as the second oar jarred loose, pushed like flotsam. A curtain of water plowed into the boat, the pitch bottom mirroring the black clouds, ejecting young Billy O'Donnell. The 2 younger brothers fought the beast, plodding seaward frantically with slow but steady progress, plucking an oar, then a second push towards the shore, leaning, almost capsizing, then leaning again, buffeted by a wave, and then another. They lunged, pulling and grappling, finally wrestling him from the churning muscle of water, draping him into the castle-like currach. Rain pelted the cobblestones and stabbed at the cheeks, the old currach maker gazing through a prism of tears, his indigo eyes glinting, the sea mist glistening his countenance, the furrows in his forehead grave-like, as his Billy lay, finally, ashore, breathing no more. Comic relief? Comic relief too? Largest city in the Balearic Islands is Palma de Mallorca, and we were going to go to Palma, and I used to be a good tourist. I'd read up and study and everything, and now I'm like, when do we go again? Is my passport? And so my wife reads about we got to go on the old wooden train from Palma up to Sóller. Really? Okay, that sounds good. I said, okay. And you take this old clanking wooden train up to this beautiful town of Sóller, a lot of tourists like us, and then you take a beautiful tram down to this puerto. I think there's no cars, nothing, just the tram down. And it was incredibly beautiful. And then we had lunch, and I looked over and I saw the Germans sipping their beer. So I wrote, Train of Wonder, Mallorca. A couple of foreign words. Olivos is olive tree, limoneros, lemon tree, mistral, the wind from the Mediterranean. Puerto is port, langostino colored. Langostino is lobster. Alemanes is Germans. Sardinas, sardines. Train of Wonder, Mallorca. The old wooden train to Sóller, electrified in 29, breaks through Palma's near African streets, up the dry hills, hoping its way past olivos and desperate goats. Limoneros bent with jaundiced citrus gonads, wind-whipped by a mini mistral through tunnels darker than a total eclipse, clanking its way up to the town, to the intimate tram down to the puerto, where langostino-colored alemanes sip beer and munch sardinas, wondering why they were born in Dortmund and not Puerto de Sóller. Okay. You're not going to be able to see this very well, and Lisa did a great job. There were several pictures in 2014 and of a garment factory collapse in Bangladesh, and they pulled girls out days and days afterwards. And there was one photo. She's sitting there, almost regal-like. And it's like 5 days she's been buried in the rubble. She looks like she just got out of the shower, and her eyes are just burning with an intensity. And so I wrote this. It's called The Silence Still of the Subaltern. And subaltern is a British military word, but it's used by feminist literary critics like Gayatri Spivak to mean the people without voices. And after all, if you look at the 4 billion people in the world, only a handful really have voices. So this was about that, and it was from the sweatshop photo collapse. Can you hear the silent screams of the subaltern's terrified eyes? A powder blue t-shirt with a lizard logo on an Akron street. Blazing eyes of acrid defeat carried from the rubble of the building surrendered to gravity and greed, poverty and need. Pristine sands, cobalt water kisses, and Izod yacht by Capri's E. Ferrarioni. He stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni. The Bangladeshi girl lost only one leg that day, and she never did have an account on Twitter. All right, comic relief. I was going to read at my inauguration, or as my best friend sarcastically called it, your coronation. And Conchita said a few days before I was going to go, "What are you going to read?" I said, "Oh, well, okay, you're interested." I read the list. There was one poem on there that led to a brief argument. She didn't want that poem read. It was Conchita in flamenco dress. She said, "That's not me." We argued back and forth. Pablo was 8. He goes, "Oh, that's a really good poem." She goes, "You shut up. You got a poem for you." And I thought, well, no, wait a second. I wrote that poem when he was 3. So I thought, what's Pablo into now? He was into Little League Baseball. So I decided, okay, I'd write Pablo and Friends at Duck Creek Park. Baseball bat, baseball glove, crooked hat, peach fuzz. Infield homers, outfield adventures. Baby sis and half-filled diapers. Soggy hot dogs, aluminum bats. A-bata. Boys in cups, protect the family jewels. Never you mind, son, just wear it. Gap-toothed pitcher looking for home plate, not to be found even with the Hubble telescope. The mercy rule, down 10 runs. Smiles in red, tears in blue. It's Little League, for me and for you. How are we doing on time?
You're still good. Okay,
I got a few more here. I did bring 200 of my favorites, but... Okay. A lot of times I start off with this poem, and the title is not popular in the Spanish-speaking world, I'm told, but when the Madrid train bombing came, I had been in some of those. I had been in the train stations. I'd been in the train stations probably more than I'd been in New York, and even though 9/11 hit us all as Americans, and I felt really a punch when bombing took place, and of course there were a lot of students in the train. And a couple of words here. Pozo is well in Spanish. Campana is bell. Angelita is little angel. Abuelita is little grandmother. And so this poem is called Angelita de la Campana et el Pozo. And El Pozo means well, but the train station, one of the train stations, is El Pozo del Tío Raimundo, Uncle Raymond's well. We have a station, the Blue Line, the Central Station, A Street, Uncle Raymond's well. And this especially was written within literally moments of seeing on El País or whatever on Conchita's computer, quote, "We looked down at their lifeless bodies and the cell phones of many were ringing." Emergency workers at El Pozo train station, Madrid, March 2004. And Alcalá de Henares is a city outside of Madrid where they found the terrorist cars. The ringer chosen, an old one, traditional, a kind of jingle, a kind of bell. Her first cell phone to keep her mommy in Alcalá de Henares without worries. From her first communion, where she was chosen to ring the bells, Abuelita called her Angelita de la Campana. She lay there, silent now, the chosen ringer sounding. She did not move, pouting lips filled with two-cheek kisses, just brightened for her early class. The cheery red of morning, now the crimson agony of morning. Ringing with no answer. The ringing tells the story. The sound of bells, no more answered. Okay. Comic Relief 4. Our oldest daughter, when she was a freshman at Davenport Central, very tough to get into show choir. She was the only girl that got into varsity show choir. And they did a Ricky Martin medley. And so this is Alexandra at the show choir dance. Livin' the vida loca, sashay and cross the stage, 50 lissom dancers moving like seaweed in the Sargasso Sea. Hot gold pants like Tutankhamun's tomb, flashing a smile that would change the migration of birds. Flicking hair aside, hips moving to make Presley jealous. The beat, the mambo, living the vida loca. Breathing that half Hispanic soul like fire into the great gaping crowd. Skin, the color of, breathing that half Hispanic soul like fire into the gaping crowd. Swaying like corn silk in a prairie storm. High heels stomping the blues away. Skin, the color of mocha. Green eyes like Irish tarns, a tilted head, the boys' sighs echo through the awed like it's Notre Dame and the blind nuns just got sight. Okay, back to World War II. Those Nazis, damn Nazis. I was a student in 1973 outside of Hamburg. I had class in the morning, and a lot of the Augustana students would just chill out and everything in this small town. I had to head to Hamburg and see the sights. Every day I'd head to Hamburg. And the first day I was heading to Hamburg on the S-Bahn, I'm sitting there, the S-Bahn, looking around, okay, boom, 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 looking around, okay, there's like 20 women my mother's age. There's like 20 women my grandmother's age. Ain't no men here. Where are all the men? Oh yeah, I remember where all the men are. Okay, so this is called vacant seats or vacancy. Vacant seats on the S-Bahn from Blankenese to Hamburg, or just vacant seats. The S-Bahn snakes its way upstream on the north shore of the Elbe. Pieces of ghostly face reflected in the windows. Spruces pass by like soldiers, evergreen to the front, part fur, part face. Eyes hanging in the bows. Seated stoically, glints of gray hair and lace floating in the windows. Other heads of gunmetal beside empty seats. Heads nod as the train bobs. Orbs in the aspens like Christmas ornaments. O Tannenbaum? O Tannenberg. The collage weaving together its woof of widows' wigs dangling in the yews. Sighs melting into the hissing of S-Bahn brakes. Women, women only. Cobalt eyes staring, lonely, so lonely among the vacant seats. Okay. Back in, 2003 or 4, I think we were at war in Iraq. We're still at war somewhere. I mean, we're Gore Vidal, perpetual war for perpetual peace. I mean, give me a break, folks. But I wrote this poem. See all these yellow ribbons all around, yellow ribbons, so I wrote yellow ribbons. We are here now, screaming at the top of our lungs, yet only silence at the top of the mountain ensues. At the top of the heap, they eschew our call for sanity, for peace. Our protests now all a banality. Our desire for justice as futile as building walls against the solstice. screaming and pointing at their fingers on the balance, echoing to the earless canyons, entranced, the fearless minions, Robotons marching to the beat of daily necessity, of yearly defeat, of thee I sing, and the chance for better tomorrows, carted off in wheelbarrows of apathy and curled yellow ribbons, magnetically implanted on our cars, like cancer's scars on our national psyche. Comic Relief 5. The bankruptcy court in Kane County. You go to a place like this, or Joliet, or someplace, and go there and find a wall about the size of that wall back there, and they got a hole, and you go, okay, this must be several weeks. No, this is today's schedule, okay? Judge Castling has 291 hearings this morning. This ought to be fun. Well, they call the case. If you don't jump up and run up, you're at the end of the list. The bankruptcy court in Kane County. A murmur of disparate voices. A chuckle here, a cluckling there, uniform black suits, a diversity of ties. Papers clutched, fingers pointed, glasses on foreheads, nodding heads, mock disbelief. A call of a case, a scramble to face the judge, a change in tone from aggressivity or nonchalance to respectful obeisance. Status discussed, a knowing glance, much left unsaid, case reset, electronic docket, shuffling of feet. Parties dismissed, dark suits melt away. You tell me when I have time for one more.
How about we do one more so that'll give you time to answer
Okay.
questions and have
All right.
conversation before we close at 8.
Okay. Now, this is a new poem, and it's got two versions. One version, it just goes straight through, and it's all nice and And I wanted Dick Stahl to come to Quinn City Poets because I wanted him to give me his advice. I asked Dick for advice when things get really tough. So there is, right in the middle of this poem called If I Were an Orchard, right in the middle of the poem, there's an interlude. And really, you might say, oh, this is totally out of place, this parentheses and this interlude, but really it's the only time that the orchard gets to speak or gets to be heard. Otherwise, it's about the orchard. And it's entitled, If I Were an Orchard. If I were an orchard, you would be the blossoms, and I would cover you in topaz blankets, so the night and the stars would not be jealous. If I were an orchard, you would be the peaches, sweet as dawn and ripe as a universe of orchids, and I would come to see you to touch the nectar-laden orbs. Can you hear the brazen silos leaning with age, crooning to the exhausted crickets? If I were an orchard, you would be the swollen seeds, singing to the luscious tomorrows, and I would be the 1,000 faces of your germinations. If I were an orchard, you would be the trees. Well, I left off like 82 depressing poems. Next time.
Or if you prefer he read more and you don't have questions, we can go about 5 more minutes.
Questions? We have a couple more minutes. Questions or comments? Okay, yes?
I just read a review of a book called How to Write Poetry Like a Professor. Is that the kind of book you could recommend?
Well, it would be better if it were How to Write Poetry Like a Poet.
This is how to read poetry.
Oh, how to read poems. How to read poems. Oh, like a professor.
Yes.
That's an interesting title.
Yes, it is.
Because I remember when I won an award for the Windmill of La Galea at the Mississippi Valley Poetry Contest, And I was totally shocked to find out that they were going to have, quote, professional readers, unquote. There was almost a homicide right before she read. Can I read this poem before I get booked? A couple of months ago, I told my best friend in January I was suffering from a voice problem. I couldn't talk without incredible pain. And I gave him the heads up, and he was supposed to be here to read just in case. And he would have memorized them all. He's an actor. He'd have memorized them all. He goes, Haake, if you come to my readings, don't bring a piece of paper. I said, I'm a poet, not an actor. But that's a good question. I don't know. Any other questions? Comments? Yes?
I like how your actions help the poem. You bring out the poem on different layers, and I think that one is the, kind of the theatrics of showing and suggesting and layer on layer of meanings, words that have double meanings, and that's really good.
Well, thank you, Dick. I think it helps, my actions, my intonations, the pauses, so somebody else, if I ever do this again and I get sick, they'll have to watch this tape and just memorize it, But I appreciate that. Robert Pinsky said that the art of reading, or maybe not the art, but the art of reading poetry itself is a physical experience like a dance. It's like a dance. And, so...
Do you mark up each poem? Do you have it marked out? So like how you pause here, or the pace of the poem, or the tone of the poem, or the emphatic line, how the emphatic line must be read?
For one, I try and use either spacing, boldness, italics, either exclamation points, punctuation marks, all those things, foreign words. But in reality, it's before I have read a poem like this probably 100 times to myself, 100 times. And so I know how it's supposed to sound. So when I screw it up, it's like, how did you do that? But yeah, so that's why I have a certain way of reading it. I practice it. I don't really practice out loud. I read it over in my head, probably like you do, to see how it feels, how it works. When I go to schools, I have a Dale Haake judging criteria. In fact, this is what happened. I got elected, Poet Laureate. Black Hawk College said, oh, we want you to judge a poetry contest. I said, I can't do that. I'm not a teacher. I haven't really studied to be a teacher. I don't know. Huh? My best friend said, are you kidding? That's part of the shtick. Go do it, man, or resign. Hello, Black Hawk College. So I thought, well, okay, I better come up with some rules. And I came up with some rules. I hand it out sometimes to students. And basically, it's like, it's got to be music. It's got to have a rhythm. If it's not, it's prose. It's got to reach a universal sentiment. It can't be so solipsistic. It can be anything. It can be about a drop of dew, but if it touches a universal sentiment. And then you got to avoid a whole bunch of bad things, including trite force rhymes, trite rhymes, all that kind of stuff that people work really hard to do. And avoid all those things and let her rip, and then go back to it. Any other? Yes?
Who was it that inspired you to start doing poetry, and what was the poem that inspired you the most, and what about it?
It really goes back a ways, and when I was, believe it or not, when I was little, and we'd ride our bikes uptown, and we'd go to the little drugstore, and we'd buy my mom a Hallmark birthday card. And we'd come home, and we'd write the Hallmark birthday card. And I didn't like, I thought I could do better than that. And so that's when I started writing. And then I wrote several. And she's not here tonight, but a dear friend of mine, I went to kindergarten, grade school, junior high school, and Augustana College with, Deb Van Spybrook, Deb Zeidenzahl back then. I called her Spring Day Seidensong, because she wrote these flowery spring day poems. Actually, much deeper than that. She wrote a great poem at Augustana about abortion. She won a prize in Saga. Very, but in any event, I was writing about Vietnam and kids coming back in pine boxes. I don't have any of that work. You know, it's been gone years ago. So then I wrote some at Augustana. I was a prize winner in Saga. Thought the judges were crazy for giving me third. And I wrote some after that. Law school was difficult, and I wrote a little bit, but hardly at all. I don't have any of that. And there are two things that really got me back into it big time. One was going to Diego Navarro's 50th birthday party. And I wrote a poem called A Half Century of Diego Navarro. And I read it at his birthday party, and I think there were a couple of tears in the audience from his daughters. And so I thought, maybe I got something here. So I worked a little harder, and then I did go to a couple of classes at Comm University with Rebecca Wee that really pushed me along. She's a genius at giving you prompts. And so I started writing a lot more that way. And then I remember one time, I don't know who Conchita said, but she came down one Sunday morning. There were 5 new poems out on the counter. And she's talking to somebody. She goes, "He's putting out poems like donuts." So hopefully they don't have holes in them. Yes.
I love the detail in your imagery. We're there. We're experiencing.
Thank you. One guy came up to me one time, and I remember it was after Queen City Poets one night. He had come from the West Coast, and he said, "Yeah, those are okay if you could just kind of off some of those foreign words, man." And one of my other friends looked at him and said, "You don't know Dale, do you?" Yes.
I was wondering, Abraham Lincoln loved poetry and, wrote poetry. Do you see a connection between being a lawyer and being a poet?
Well, I get asked, Wooten would ask me sometimes, or Bruce Carter would ask me early on radio, does your law affect your poetry? I said, no, it's the other way around. I was a poet long before I was a lawyer. I am known for creativity in the courtroom. I'm known for creative writing in things. Sometimes it gets me in trouble. Haake, I struck that, So, for example, I was at a seminar. There was a dinner at the federal bar, and there was one of the sponsors there sitting next to a federal judge, and he said, "Judge Jackwig, does Dale appear in front of you very often?" And she and the law clerk across the table just started laughing. And I looked at them, and this guy, it was one of the sponsors, he said, "Well, why are you laughing?" And she said, "Mr. Haake is one of our most creative and enthusiastic advocates." So I think it's more that way. I do have a poem, Lincoln 200 Years Young. It's published in Chicago. I got my poem, The Auction. I have the bankruptcy court in Kane County. Probably not too many more. Haven't really thought about it. I got a huge pile of failures like this, and I got like 20 different notebooks from over the years where I've scribbled things down and put it away. And I mean, there's just piles of those. So when I slow down a little bit, hopefully in the next couple of years, I'll have some time to put some of those together and work a little bit more. Haven't really had much time. Yes, hello.
What is the Poet Laureate?
In England, actually it started in ancient Greece, where they have a poetry competition. Because in ancient Greece, poetry was prized above all. Philosophy, and then after that, athletic prowess in the Olympic Games. But the winner of the prize was given a laurel wreath. And so I'm not sure what year it started in England, Bill, but the Poet Laureate of England was selected, and that was the person that was supposed to go. First, they were selected from a great past, but they were supposed to be the ones, oh, the Queen Mother has a birthday. Write a poem for the Queen Mother's birthday. Oh, there's a coronation of this prince in Westphalia. Go there and write. So their job was to write poems for English life. And that was the Poet Laureate of England. Now, the United States has had a Poet Laureate for, I don't know, the last 25, 30 years or so, maybe more. And Quad City Arts started a Poet Laureate program many years ago. Dick Stahl was the first Poet Laureate. Rebecca Wee was the second. Kathleen Cox was the third, and I was selected as the fourth. Shelley Moore Guy was the fifth. And then because of really I would say the upsurgence of Midwest Poetry Center, or Midwest Writing Center, they have a poet in residence. And in a way, Quad City Arts, when they were going through the bad time in 2008 or 9, they really cut things down. I didn't get much help during my laureateship. That's okay, I understand. Over there, so we don't have a poet laureate in the Quad Cities anymore. They have a poet in residence there, and I don't know what they do, but they're very active there, and I've been there, and I've read there, and I've taught a class there. So the Poet Laureate, yeah, I had to write some occasional poems. I wrote a poem for Augustana's 150th anniversary. That was one of the most difficult things I ever did, because I kept getting it up to a B+. And I wasn't going to get it out into the audience until it's an A- at least. And I just couldn't. Well, I read it, and I still think it's a B+, to be honest. But I ran out of time, and there was a ceremony. I had to be there. I'll tell you, Dick Stahl is a master at this type of thing. When I became Poet Laureate, he wrote a poem for me. He's written poems for everything. And some of my poems are really inspired by Dick Stahl's poetry. I'll tell you that right now. Dick writes for occasions. I wrote for occasions. I forgot what I was going to say about that, but it can be very, very difficult to rise up and write for an occasion. I'm inspired by a drop of dew, the war, this. Okay, now write about Augustana's 150th. I went there. I have a lot of great memories, a lot of good things about it, but that was tough.